Lily Maxwell had everything a woman could want: wealth, a grand mansion, and a husband who provided her with all the luxuries money could buy. But as her marriage to Thomas grew colder, it was Mark, the quiet cook in their kitchen, who began to fill the void. What started as innocent conversations over meals soon spiraled into a forbidden affair that would shatter everything. When Thomas returned home one night, completely unaware of the turmoil brewing in his own house, the delicate web of lies was about to unravel, and Lily's choice would determine the fate of all their lives. Would she risk it all for a man who saw her, or stay in a marriage that had long since stopped loving her? Nestled in the rolling hills of a wealthy neighborhood, the mansion of Thomas Maxwell was a striking testament to success. Thomas had spent his life building his fortune, a self-made millionaire who had risen from humble beginnings to amass a sprawling empire. The house, a sprawling estate of marble and glass, sat like a fortress on the hill, surrounded by lush gardens and an immaculate lawn. Inside, the rooms were decorated with expensive art and antique furniture, the kind of elegance only wealth could provide. It was a home meant to impress, designed to showcase not only Thomas's success but his taste for the finer things in life. The people who lived inside the mansion were no less impressive. Thomas's wife, Lily Maxwell, had been by his side for nearly a decade. She was everything society expected her to be: beautiful, poised, and impeccably well-dressed. They were the golden couple, always seen together at charity galas and social events, admired by all who knew them. Lily, a former schoolteacher from a modest background, had adapted to her luxurious life with ease, trading in the quiet classrooms for ballroom dresses and designer shoes. But beneath the polished surface of her marriage, there were cracks that no one could see. Thomas, for all his wealth and success, was a man who was constantly on the go. His business ventures kept him away from home for weeks at a time, leaving Lily to manage the house and their social commitments alone. Despite the grandeur of their surroundings, Lily often found herself feeling lonely. She had been accustomed to the companionship of her students and friends, but in the cold, empty hallways of the mansion, she felt isolated. Her life had become one of endless events, parties, and social obligations, and though Thomas was often away, he was rarely fully present when he was home. Their marriage, once filled with warmth and love, had become more of a formality. It was a partnership built on appearances, the kind that worked for the outside world but not for their private lives. The staff in the house, however, provided Lily with the kind of human connection she was desperately craving. One of the most prominent figures among them was Mark, the family cook. Mark had been employed by the Maxwells for several years. He was in his mid-30s, tall with sharp features and a quiet, reserved manner. In the kitchen he was a master, creating meals with such skill and precision that Thomas often praised him in front of guests. Mark, though not particularly outgoing, was known for his calm demeanor and professionalism. He had a reputation for keeping to himself, working efficiently, and never drawing attention to his personal life. But as time went on, something began to change in the dynamic of the Maxwell household. Mark and Lily began to cross paths more often, their interactions starting with small conversations about the food he prepared, the weather, or the occasional personal anecdote. Mark would see Lily in the hallway, looking out the window or resting with a cup of tea, and they would exchange pleasantries. At first, it seemed harmless, a simple interaction between a wife and her staff. But it was during these brief moments that Lily began to find something in Mark that she hadn't realized she was missing: someone who listened, someone who made her feel understood. Lily had always been an intelligent and capable woman, but in the quiet of the mansion, where the weight of wealth and expectation loomed large, she found herself craving something deeper: genuine human connection. Mark, for his part, noticed the subtle changes in Lily. He saw the way her eyes would light up when they spoke, the way she seemed eager to talk to him whenever they passed each other in the hall. While he had always been professional, he couldn't deny the pull between them. It wasn't just the attention she gave him, it was the way she made him feel. For the first time in years, Mark felt seen, important. Their interactions, once formal and brief, became more frequent. Mark began to take the time to chat with Lily about small matters, like the flowers in the garden or the books she was reading. It wasn't long before they found themselves in more personal conversations, sharing bits of their pasts. It was innocent at first, two people who had nothing more than a shared moment of companionship. But with each passing day, the connection between them deepened. And in that house, where no one was truly present except for the staff and their duties, the seeds of something far more dangerous began to take root. Thomas, oblivious to the growing tension, continued to focus on his work, unaware that the walls of his mansion were closing in on a secret that would destroy everything. The connection between Lily and Mark grew subtly at first, like a thread slowly unraveling without either of them fully realizing the danger of what they were creating. In the beginning, their interactions seemed harmless, small exchanges over meals, brief conversations about the weather or the latest book Lily had picked up from the library. Mark, as always, was professional, focused on his work in the kitchen, while Lily wandered the grand halls of the mansion, looking for ways to fill the emptiness that her life had become. But it wasn't just the routine meals or casual chat that began to change things. Over time, they started to share more personal stories. Mark would tell Lily about his childhood in a small town, about his struggles to make a name for himself in the world of culinary arts. Lily, in return, began to open up about her own life before marriage, her time as a teacher, her dreams of a life that was different from the one she now led. She spoke of her longing for something more, her frustration with the cold distance that had grown between her and Thomas. Though Thomas was away on business often, when he was home he seemed consumed with his work, leaving Lily to navigate the loneliness of their life together. Mark, ever the listener, paid attention to the things that Thomas never did. He noticed the way Lily's eyes would soften when she spoke about her past, and how, when she spoke of Thomas, her voice would carry an undertone of sadness. It wasn't that she disliked her husband, she had loved him once, deeply, but the years had worn down that affection. They had become strangers to each other, existing in the same space but living separate lives. Mark could see the cracks in her marriage, the ways in which Lily yearned for something more, something real. For Lily, Mark's attentive nature became a rare comfort. In the world of socialite dinners and carefully curated events, where every word was weighed and scrutinized, Mark was a breath of fresh air. He didn't expect anything from her except for their shared conversations. He didn't see her as the wife of a millionaire, he saw her as a person, a woman, tired and searching for something genuine. The more time they spent together, the more she began to rely on those small moments, seeking them out whenever she had a chance. It was clear she had grown fond of Mark, but she struggled to understand the depth of her feelings. Was it gratitude? Was it just the need for someone to listen? Or was it something more? Mark, for his part, began to feel the weight of the growing attraction. At first he pushed it aside, telling himself that their interactions were purely innocent, just two people with a common understanding of loneliness. But as the days wore on, the tension between them began to feel palpable. Mark's admiration for Lily deepened into something far more intense, something he wasn't prepared for. He would catch himself thinking about her long after their conversations ended. Her laugh, her voice, the way she would look out the window, lost in thought, these moments began to occupy his mind in a way he hadn't expected. The line between professional respect and personal longing was blurring, and neither of them knew how to stop it. One evening, as they shared a quiet moment in the kitchen, the atmosphere shifted. Lily had come in to check on the dinner preparations. Thomas was away, and the house was eerily silent. The flickering light from the stove cast soft shadows over the kitchen, and the air felt heavy, charged. Mark was putting the finishing touches on the meal when Lily, standing beside him, reached out to adjust a dish. Their hands brushed briefly, And in that instant, everything seemed to stop. The world outside the kitchen vanished, and it was just the two of them, standing in the small space that had slowly become the only place Lily felt truly seen. It wasn't a deliberate move, but it was a turning point. The touch lingered just a second too long, and in that moment they both knew something had shifted. The attraction was undeniable now, and as much as they both tried to resist it, there was no turning back. The next few weeks saw more moments like this: lingering glances, accidental touches, unspoken understanding. Lily, for the first time in years, felt alive in a way she hadn't known she could. Mark, the quiet, professional cook, had somehow become a part of her world in a way that Thomas no longer could. But even in their stolen moments, a sense of guilt began to creep in. Lily knew this wasn't right. She was married, and she loved Thomas in her own way, despite everything. But Mark, too, was beginning to show signs of frustration. He wanted more than just these fleeting interactions. He wanted something permanent, something real. He wanted her. And as much as Lily tried to deny it, she found herself drawn to him in ways she couldn't explain. Mark began to push the boundaries. He would linger after dinner, offering to clean up just to have more time with her. The conversations became deeper, more intimate, and their connection grew stronger with each passing day. Lily, caught between her loyalty to Thomas and the pull she felt toward Mark, was torn. Her marriage, once solid and full of promise, had become a shadow of what it had been, and she found herself questioning everything. Was it too late to fix what was broken with Thomas? Was the connection she shared with Mark just a fleeting moment of passion, or was it something more? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but one thing was clear: her life, the carefully constructed facade of perfection, was beginning to unravel, and neither of them knew how to stop it. As the weeks passed, the atmosphere in the Maxwell household grew heavier. Thomas remained largely unaware of the growing tension between his wife and the cook. His business ventures consumed his time, and his absence from the house meant that he had little idea of the subtle shift taking place within the walls of his home. When he was home, his attention was always split between work and leisure, leaving Lily to navigate the daily routines of their life, largely on her own. But the distance between Thomas and Lily was becoming more obvious to anyone who paid close attention. The once loving glances they shared had disappeared, replaced by polite nods and perfunctory conversations. Lily, for all her outward grace, was struggling. She had begun to retreat into herself, spending long hours alone in the mansion, feeling more like a guest in her own home than a wife. The social events that had once been a joyous occasion for the couple now felt like an obligation, and Thomas, despite his wealth and success, seemed as trapped by his own life as Lily had become. The foundation of their marriage was eroding, and there was nothing either of them seemed willing to do to stop it. In the midst of this growing emotional distance, Mark's presence in the household began to take on new significance. No longer just a professional figure in the kitchen, he had become Lily's confidant, the one person who seemed to understand her at a deeper level. His quiet attentiveness, the way he noticed the small things about her, the slight tremor in her voice when she spoke of Thomas, the distant look in her eyes when she gazed out the window, had started to make Lily feel as though someone truly saw her. She had never felt this way with Thomas. Her husband had always been distant, absorbed in his own world, while Mark's eyes seemed to pierce through her, making her feel like she was the only person in the room. It was a dangerous game, and Lily knew it. She could sense the growing intensity between them, but the feeling of being seen, really seen, was intoxicating. Mark was patient, never pushing her, but always there, always understanding. He spoke to her in a way that no one else ever had. Their conversations stretched long into the evenings, sometimes late into the night. She found herself looking forward to these quiet moments more than she cared to admit. It wasn't just the relief from loneliness that drew her to him, it was something deeper, a connection she couldn't fully explain. Mark, too, felt the pull. He had always kept a professional distance, never letting his personal feelings interfere with his work. But as the days wore on, he couldn't ignore the way Lily had begun to depend on him not just for meals, but for companionship, for emotional support. She had become the center of his thoughts, and he found himself lingering in the kitchen longer than necessary, offering to prepare special meals just to see her smile. The boundaries he had once carefully maintained were crumbling. Every glance they shared, every moment of silence that stretched between them, seemed charged with an unspoken understanding. It wasn't long before their professional boundaries blurred entirely. One evening, as Lily wandered into the kitchen to escape the oppressive quiet of the house, Mark was preparing a dish he thought she would like. It had become their little ritual. Lily would stop by while he worked, watching him cook, and they would talk about everything and nothing. But tonight the air felt different. The house was still, and for once they were alone, the usual hum of activity and distant conversations absent. As Mark plated the meal, he turned to hand it to her, and their hands brushed. It was a small touch, but the intensity of it was unmistakable. For a moment neither of them moved. They stood there, close, in the quiet kitchen, and the world outside seemed to vanish. It wasn't the first time their hands had brushed, but it was the first time that it felt like more. Something shifted in that instant, an unspoken agreement between them that neither could ignore. Mark's eyes locked onto Lily's, and she felt a rush of heat spread through her, the lines between what was appropriate and what was not completely vanishing. Lily quickly pulled her hand away, as if afraid of what might come next. She tried to brush it off, to pretend that nothing had happened. But the damage had been done. She had crossed a line, and Mark had seen it too. The tension that had been simmering between them was now undeniable. It was no longer just an attraction, it was something more, something dangerous. The next few days were filled with silence and tension. Neither of them spoke of what had happened in the kitchen, but the weight of it lingered in the air. Mark continued to prepare the meals, his hands moving with the same precision, but now his thoughts were consumed with Lily. And Lily, for the first time in a long time, felt like she was standing on the edge of something. The possibility of a new life, one where she was free to make her own choices, was both terrifying and thrilling. But with every passing day, the reality of the situation began to weigh heavier on them both. Mark's patience was wearing thin. He wanted more than just fleeting moments of connection. He wanted to be with her. He began to push the boundaries, testing Lily's resolve. At first it was small things, lingering glances, a touch of the arm here and there. But as the days went on, Mark's intentions became clearer. He wanted her to make a choice. But Lily hesitated. She couldn't bring herself to face the truth of what was happening. She loved Thomas in her own way, but the marriage they had was broken. And Mark represented something raw, something real. Yet, deep inside, she knew that following this path would have consequences she wasn't prepared for, and the fear of those consequences held her back. But the pressure was building, the tension rising. Soon, the affair that had begun as an innocent connection would spiral out of control, leaving everyone involved to face a reality they had never anticipated. And the tragedy that awaited them all would forever change the course of their lives. The tension in the Maxwell household grew more palpable as the days passed, a simmering undercurrent that neither Lily nor Mark could ignore. Their secret meetings, once stolen moments of quiet connection, had begun to feel like a ticking time bomb. Each stolen glance, every lingering touch, was a small act of defiance against a life neither of them were fully satisfied with. Mark, despite his calm exterior, was beginning to crack under the pressure. He could no longer deny that his feelings for Lily had turned into something far more intense than he had ever anticipated. He wanted more than just fleeting moments with her, he wanted a future. Lily, too, found herself at a crossroads. She could no longer ignore the growing attraction she felt toward Mark. He was everything Thomas had stopped being: attentive, present, and understanding. The spark between them had ignited into something undeniable, but the guilt gnawed at her. She couldn't help but think of Thomas. the man she had once loved, the man who had given her everything. And yet, that love had faded, buried under years of neglect and emotional distance. She tried to convince herself that what she felt for Mark was just a fleeting distraction, but deep down, she knew it wasn't. The affair, which had started quietly and discreetly, was now a volatile secret that threatened to consume them both. Mark had been patient, waiting for Lily to make a decision, but that patience was wearing thin. He had begun to push her harder, suggesting, even demanding, that she make a choice, him or Thomas. It wasn't a question he could continue to ignore. Every time Lily hesitated, every time she found an excuse to delay the inevitable, the pressure mounted. The stakes had never been higher, and Mark began to show signs of desperation. His usually calm demeanor cracked under the weight of his growing feelings. He started making more overt gestures, trying to bring Lily closer, but every time she pulled away, torn between the life she had built with Thomas and the forbidden desire that had bloomed between her and Mark. Lily's internal struggle reached its breaking point one evening. Thomas had been away for a week on a business trip, leaving Lily to manage the house on her own. She had spent the days trying to occupy her mind, but every time she turned around, Mark was there, a constant reminder of the tension between them. The conversations, once light and easy, had become more charged, the silence between them heavier, more loaded. That night, after dinner, Lily wandered into the kitchen, as she often did, to see Mark cleaning up. He was wiping down the counters when she walked in, and their eyes met. There was an unspoken understanding between them, an acknowledgement that the moment they were in could not last much longer. Mark had been biding his time, but now he was done waiting. "Lily," he said, his voice low but firm, "you have to make a choice. I can't keep doing this. I'm not going to wait forever." The words hung in the air between them, and Lily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had always known this moment would come, the moment when the balance between guilt and desire would tip in one direction or the other. But hearing it from Mark, hearing the urgency in his voice, made her realize just how far they had both gone. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Her thoughts were a jumbled mess. She knew what Mark was asking, but the weight of her decision felt suffocating. Could she really leave Thomas, the man who had given her everything, for a man who had once been a mere employee in her house? Could she truly throw away everything she had known for something uncertain, something so fraught with danger? Mark stepped closer, his gaze fixed on hers. "I'm not asking you to leave him tonight, but I can't keep pretending that we're just friends. I need to know where I stand." Lily's heart raced. She could feel her pulse in her throat, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. She wanted to scream, to run away from the impossible situation she found herself in, but she couldn't. She had been holding this in for so long, this tangled web of emotions, and now it was all crashing down at once. "I need time," she whispered. But even as the words left her lips, she knew it was a lie. She had made up her mind long ago, even if she hadn't admitted it to herself. Mark looked at her, his expression a mixture of frustration and longing. "Time? How much time do you need, Lily? I can't keep waiting for you to make up your mind. You know what this is. You know what I want." Lily turned away, her breath shaky as she tried to compose herself. She couldn't look at him, not with the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She was trapped between two men, two lives, and a future she wasn't sure she could even imagine. The guilt of what she was considering was suffocating, but the desire to be with Mark, to escape the hollow existence she had with Thomas, was equally overpowering. It was then that she heard the distant sound of tires crunching on the gravel outside the house. Thomas was home. Lily froze, her heart racing in her chest. The moment of reckoning had arrived. She had been playing with fire for so long, and now the flames were about to consume her. She had no idea how to untangle herself from the mess she had created, or whether she even wanted to. The choice had never been more difficult, but in that moment she realized something that chilled her to the bone. No matter what she decided, everything would change, and there would be no going back. Before she could turn to face Mark, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. Thomas was home, and the world she had been carefully hiding from him was about to come crashing down. The door creaked open, and Lily's heart jumped into her throat. She had been caught in the middle of a storm she couldn't control, and now Thomas was back. His footsteps echoed through the grand hallway as he entered the house, completely unaware of the tension that had been building in the walls for weeks. For a brief moment, everything seemed to freeze. Lily stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling, her breath shallow. Mark, who had been standing just a few feet away, looked at her with a mixture of frustration and longing. Neither of them knew what to do. Thomas's voice called out, "Lily, I'm home." Lily quickly smoothed her hair, trying to compose herself, but the knot in her stomach only tightened. She felt like an actress who had just been caught mid-performance, her role unraveling before her very eyes. Mark didn't move at first, but when Thomas's footsteps grew closer, he quickly turned and slipped out of the room, disappearing into the back hallway. The sound of his retreat made Lily's chest tighten. She didn't know what was worse, the fact that Mark had left or that she was alone again with the man who had been nothing more than a shadow in her life for months. Thomas entered the kitchen, hanging his coat up on the hook by the door. He seemed cheerful, completely unaware of the quiet chaos that had consumed his wife. His eyes swept over the room, then landed on Lily. "How was your day?" Lily, her heart pounding, forced a smile. "Fine." Quiet, she felt the lie like a weight in her chest. "How was your trip?" "It was good," productive Thomas replied, setting his briefcase on the counter. He reached for a glass of water, his movements casual and relaxed, but Lily noticed how distant he seemed. There was a coldness in his eyes, a subtle detachment that she hadn't seen before. He seemed more like a stranger than ever. "Glad to hear it," Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. She wanted to say something more, but the words were caught in her throat. Thomas didn't seem to notice the discomfort in her voice. Instead, he moved around the kitchen, humming softly as he prepared himself a late-night snack. Lily couldn't help but notice how mechanical his movements were, how much he seemed to be going through the motions of life without actually living it. This was the man she had once loved, the man she had dreamed of a future with. And yet, standing here in the kitchen, she felt more disconnected from him than ever. 1,000 thoughts ran through Lily's mind, all crashing together. She wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to confess, to throw the truth at him like a weapon, to see if it would shatter the world they had built. But she couldn't. The fear of losing him, of losing everything, held her back, and the guilt, the suffocating guilt, wrapped around her heart like a vise. Thomas finally turned to face her, his brow furrowed slightly. "You've been a little distant lately," he said, his tone casual, but there was an edge to it. "Is everything okay?" Lily felt the world narrow down to that one question. She could feel the weight of the lies she had been living, the lies she had told herself, and the lies she had told him. It wasn't just Mark. It wasn't just Mark. It wasn't just the affair. It was everything. Her marriage, her life. Everything she had built was falling apart, and Thomas had no idea. "I'm fine," she said, her voice almost a whisper. She knew it was a lie, but she couldn't bring herself to say anything else. The truth seemed too overwhelming, too destructive to let out. For a moment, Thomas looked at her, as if trying to gauge her mood. His gaze softened, but it wasn't the look of the man who had once loved her with his whole heart. This was a man who had grown used to the distance between them, a man who had learned to live with the empty spaces. "If you ever need to talk," he said quietly, his voice lacking its usual warmth, "you know where I am." Lily nodded, but inside she was screaming. She knew exactly where he was, and it wasn't where she needed him to be. As Thomas finished his snack and left the kitchen to go upstairs, Lily stood there for a moment, alone in the cold quiet. Her mind raced. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her chest, suffocating her. Mark had made it clear he couldn't wait much longer. But was she ready to face the consequences of her actions? Was she ready to destroy everything for a future that was far from certain? She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had once held Thomas's with love and promise. But now they felt foreign, stained by the secret she was carrying. The guilt was unbearable. Yet there was another part of her, a part that had been quiet for so long, that felt a flicker of freedom. With Mark, there were no pretenses, no expectations. For the first time in years, she felt seen. She felt wanted. Lily didn't know what to do. The world she had known was falling apart, and she had no idea how to piece it back together. She couldn't go back to the way things were, not with Thomas, not with herself. The affair with Mark had irrevocably changed her, and she was no longer the woman she had been when she walked into this house years ago. She thought about Mark's words, "Make a choice." Lily turned toward the hallway, her footsteps quiet as she walked toward the stairs. She wasn't sure if she was running from something or toward something, but either way, she knew her life would never be the same.